The ladder shook hard under Elena Whitfield's feet, and before she could grab the branch above her, the world tipped sideways. She screamed once, short and sharp, as the basket of oranges flew from her hands and the ground rushed up to meet her. Then, instead of pain, she felt two strong arms catch her mid-fall, pulling her against a firm chest just before she hit the earth. For a moment, neither of them moved. Elena's heart pounded so loudly she was sure the stranger could hear it. She looked up, ready to apologize, and found herself staring into a pair of calm gray eyes that did not look angry at all. If anything, the man looked amused. "That was quite an entrance," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried, as though catching falling women from ladders was something he did every day. Elena scrambled to her feet, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Oranges rolled across the grass around them, and her apron was covered in dirt. "I am so sorry, sir. I did not see you there. Are you hurt?" "Not at all," he said, brushing a bit of orchard dust from his sleeve, "though I cannot say the same for your basket." She glanced down at the scattered fruit and groaned. It had taken her nearly an hour to fill that basket, and now half the oranges were bruised beyond saving. "The harvest steward will have my head," she muttered, already dropping to her knees to gather what she could. The stranger crouched beside her without a word, and began picking up oranges too. Elena stole a glance at him. His clothes were finer than anything worn by the estate workers, but they were simple enough that she assumed he must be some kind of visiting official, perhaps a merchant come to inspect the harvest before it was sent to market. His hands, she noticed, were clean and unused to labor, yet he did not seem to mind getting them dirty now. "You do not have to do that," she said. "It is my mess." "Nonsense," he replied. "You fell because I startled you, standing here like a fool in the middle of the path. The least I can do is help you clean up after myself." Elena almost laughed at that, though she caught herself. Laughing at a well-dressed stranger did not seem wise, no matter how kind his words sounded. Still, there was something in the easy way he spoke that put her at ease, as if rank and manners did not matter to him the way they mattered to everyone else on the estate. They filled the basket together in silence for a while, the late afternoon sun slanting gold through the orange trees. The air smelled sweet and sharp, citrus and warm soil mixed together, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the other workers calling to one another as they moved down the rows. "You work here often?" the stranger asked, breaking the quiet. "Every harvest season," Elena said. "My father is the head groundskeeper. I help wherever I am needed, though mostly with the orchard and the flower gardens." "And do you enjoy it? The work, I mean?" She considered the question seriously, which surprised her a little, since most people who asked never actually wanted an honest answer. "I do. There is something peaceful about it. The trees do not lie to you, and they do not ask for anything you cannot give them. Water, sun, patience, that is all." The stranger studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "That is a rare way to look at things," he said quietly. "Most people I know want far more complicated rewards for far less effort." Elena tilted her head, curious about the strange weight in his words, but she did not ask. It was not her place to pry into the affairs of a man she had just met, no matter how interesting his comment sounded. Instead, she stood and lifted the basket, testing its weight. "Thank you for your help," she said. "I should get back before the steward notices I am missing." "Of course," he said, rising as well. "Might I ask your name?" "Elena," she said. "Elena Whitfield." "Elena," he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. "It suits you." She waited for him to offer his own name in return, but he only smiled, a small private smile that made her stomach flutter in a way she did not understand. "I hope we meet again, Elena Whitfield," he said, and then he turned and walked deeper into the orchard, leaving her standing there with a basket of bruised oranges and a strange, warm feeling she could not quite explain. That night, as she scrubbed dirt from beneath her fingernails in the small cottage she shared with her father and two younger siblings, Elena found herself thinking about the stranger far more than she should have. She did not even know his name, and yet the memory of his arms catching her, steady and sure, kept returning to her mind like a song she could not stop humming. Her younger sister Charlotte noticed the distracted look on her face over dinner. "You seem far away tonight," Charlotte said, nudging her with an elbow. "Did something happen in the orchard?" "Nothing important," Elena said quickly, though the warmth in her cheeks betrayed her. "I fell off a ladder, that is all." "You fell?" Their father, a weathered but kind man named Edmund, looked up sharply from his plate. "Are you hurt?" "No, Papa. Someone caught me before I hit the ground." Edmund's brow furrowed. "Who?" Elena hesitated. "I am not certain. A visitor, I think. He did not give his name." Charlotte's eyes lit up with mischief. A mysterious stranger who catches falling maidens in orchards? Elena, that sounds like something out of a storybook. It was nothing like that, Elena insisted, though even as she said it, she was not entirely sure she believed her own words. There had been something about the encounter that felt different from an ordinary meeting, something she could not name, but could still feel humming beneath her skin. The days that followed brought the usual rhythm of harvest work, but Elena found herself watching the orchard paths more closely than before, half hoping and half dreading that the stranger might appear again. She told herself it was foolish. Men like him, whoever he truly was, did not linger in the memory of common workers. He had probably already forgotten her name. But 3 days later, as she knelt beside a row of young trees pulling weeds from the soil, she heard footsteps behind her, unhurried and familiar somehow, though she could not have explained why she recognized them. "You have a talent for making a simple task look complicated," the voice said, and Elena's heart jumped before she even turned around. There he was, standing at the edge of the row, with his hands clasped behind his back, watching her with that same faint, amused smile from before. He wore a different coat today, a dark green one that made his eyes look even more striking, but everything else about him was the same, calm and unhurried, as though the whole world could wait for him. "You came back," she said, before she could stop herself. "I told you I hoped we would meet again," he replied, stepping closer. "Did you doubt me?" "I did not know what to think," she admitted, brushing dirt from her hands as she rose to her feet. "You never told me your name." Something flickered across his face, there and gone, so quickly she almost missed it. "Alexander," he said finally. "You may call me Alexander." "Alexander," she repeated, and the name felt strange and pleasant on her tongue. "Well, Alexander, if you are here to inspect the orchard again, I am afraid there is not much to see today. The real harvest work happens further down, near the eastern rows." "Perhaps I am not here for the orchard at all," he said, and though his tone stayed light, there was something underneath it that made Elena's breath catch. She did not know how to respond to that, so instead, she busied herself with her basket, pretending to check for weeds she had already pulled. Alexander watched her for a moment, then knelt beside her without being asked, just as he had the first day, and began helping with the work as though it were the most natural thing in the world for a man in fine clothes to do. They talked as they worked, about small things at first, the weather, the quality of the harvest, the strange habits of the estate's old gardener who insisted on singing to the roses every morning. But slowly, the conversation deepened. Alexander asked about her family, and Elena found herself telling him about her mother, who had died when Charlotte was still small, and how she had taken on the responsibility of helping raise her younger siblings ever since. "That must have been difficult," Alexander said, his voice softer now, stripped of its usual playful edge, "to carry so much so young." "It was not a choice, really," Elena said, shrugging. "When someone needs you, you simply step forward. There is no other way to think about it." Alexander went quiet for a moment, staring at the orange tree beside them as though it held some answer he was searching for. "I wish more people understood things the way you do," he said finally. "In my experience, most people spend their whole lives calculating what they can gain before they decide to help anyone at all." Elena studied him carefully, noticing again the strange weight behind his words, the way he spoke as though he carried burdens far heavier than an ordinary visitor should carry. "You speak as if you know such people very well," she said. "I do," Alexander admitted. "Better than I would like." She wanted to ask more, to understand what world he came from that had made him so guarded and so tired beneath his easy charm. But something told her he was not ready to share that yet, and she respected the unspoken boundary. Instead, she offered him a small smile and changed the subject, telling him about the orange trees instead, how each one had been planted by her grandfather decades ago, how the estate's orchards were known throughout the region for producing the sweetest fruit in the county. By the time the sun began to dip low over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Elena realized with surprise that hours had passed. Her basket was full, her back ached pleasantly from the work, and beside her, Alexander sat with his sleeves rolled up and dirt on his knees, looking more relaxed than she imagined a man like him ever allowed himself to look. "I should return to the house," he said finally, rising and brushing off his trousers, "but I find myself hoping once again that our paths will cross soon." "The orchard is not going anywhere," Elena said, smiling despite herself. "Neither am I, for that matter, at least not until the harvest ends." "Then I suppose I have a reason to visit often," Alexander said, and there was something in his gaze as he said it, something warm and searching, that made Elena's pulse quicken in a way she had never experienced before. She watched him walk away through the rows of trees, his figure growing smaller against the fading light, and she could not shake the feeling that something important had just begun, something that would change the quiet, simple rhythm of her life, in ways she could not yet imagine. She did not know his last name. She did not know why a man dressed so finely spent his afternoons pulling weeds beside a groundskeeper's daughter. But as she carried her basket back toward the cottage, the sweet smell of oranges still clinging to her hands, Elena found that for the first time in a long while, she was looking forward to tomorrow, with something that felt dangerously close to hope. That night, sleep did not come easily. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of the small room she shared with Charlotte, replaying every word of their conversation, every glance, every quiet pause between them. She told herself again that it meant nothing, that men of his standing did not fall for orchard girls, no matter how kind their conversations felt. But even as she thought it, some stubborn part of her heart refused to listen, already counting the hours until she might see him again beneath the orange trees. Over the following weeks, Alexander became a familiar presence in the orchard, though never a predictable one. Some days he arrived in the early morning, before the mist had fully lifted from the grass. Other days he came only as the sun began to set, when most of the workers had already gone home, and Elena lingered behind to finish her tasks alone. She never knew when to expect him, and yet somehow she always seemed to sense it, a strange awareness that prickled at the back of her neck moments before his footsteps sounded on the path. Their conversations grew easier with each visit, the careful politeness of strangers slowly giving way to something warmer and more honest. Elena told him about her mother's laugh, how it used to fill the whole cottage even on the coldest winter nights. She told him about the small dreams she rarely spoke of out loud, like wanting to see the ocean someday, though she had never traveled further than the market town 2 hours from the estate. Alexander listened to all of it with an intensity that surprised her, as though her words were rare treasures he did not want to miss. In return, he offered pieces of himself too, though always carefully, like a man testing the strength of ice before stepping onto it. He spoke of long days filled with obligations that left him little room to breathe, of a family that valued appearances above almost everything else, of a loneliness that seemed strange coming from someone who was clearly never without company. He never mentioned his last name, and Elena never pushed him to. There was an unspoken agreement between them that some things were simply not meant to be asked yet, and she found herself content to let the mystery remain, if only because it meant more time spent beside him. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the largest orange tree in the orchard, its branches heavy with ripening fruit, Alexander turned to her with an unusually serious expression. "Do you ever wish for a different life, Elena? One away from all of this?" She thought about the question carefully before answering, the way she thought about most things. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when the work is hard, and my back aches, and Charlotte will not stop complaining about her chores, I imagine what it might be like to live somewhere else, to do something else entirely. But then I remember how much I love this orchard, how the trees have watched me grow since I was small enough to hide inside their shadows. I think, in the end, I would choose this life again, even if I were given every other option in the world." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You make contentment sound simple," he said finally. "For most people I know, it is the hardest thing in the world to find." "Perhaps they are looking in the wrong places," Elena said gently. "Contentment does not come from having more. It comes from wanting less than you already have." He laughed softly at that, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, the kind she had not heard from him before. "I think you may be the wisest person I have ever met," he said, "and certainly the most stubborn." "Stubborn," she repeated, feigning offense. "I prefer to think of myself as determined." "Call it what you like," Alexander said, smiling. "It suits you either way." As the weeks passed, whispers began to circulate among the estate staff. Elena noticed the way the older workers glanced at her with curious, knowing looks whenever Alexander's visits coincided with her own schedule in the orchard. She noticed, too, how quickly the household servants seemed to appear whenever he lingered too long in one place, as though someone had been assigned to keep watch over his movements. It struck her as strange for a simple merchant or visiting official to command such quiet, careful attention, but whenever she considered asking him directly, something always held her back. It was Charlotte, sharp-eyed and endlessly curious, who first voiced the suspicion aloud. "You do realize the whole estate is talking about you and that stranger," Charlotte said one evening as they washed dishes together after supper. "Old Margaret from the kitchen says the household staff bow their heads whenever he passes, even the ones who have never met him before." Elena frowned, setting down the plate she had been drying. "Bow their heads? Why would they do that for a visiting merchant?" "That is exactly my question," Charlotte said, raising an eyebrow. "Elena, what if he is not simply a merchant at all? What if he is someone far more important than he has let on? The thought had crossed Elena's mind more than once, quiet and uninvited, but she had always pushed it away, unwilling to complicate the simple joy she found in Alexander's company. "It does not matter who he is," she said finally, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "We are only friends, Charlotte, nothing more." Charlotte gave her a look that suggested she did not believe a single word of that statement, but she said nothing further, choosing instead to let the matter rest for the night. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted, and Elena found herself watching Alexander more closely during his next visit, searching for clues she had somehow overlooked before. She noticed the quality of the fabric in his coats, finer than anything she had ever seen up close. She noticed the way he sometimes caught himself mid-sentence, as though choosing his words with unusual care. She noticed, most of all, the faint shadow of exhaustion that sometimes crossed his features, the look of a man carrying responsibilities far heavier than casual conversation ever revealed. "You seem distracted today," Alexander observed, as they walked together, along the edge of the orchard where the trees gave way to an open field dotted with wildflowers. "Is something troubling you?" Elena hesitated, weighing whether to voice the question that had been building inside her for days. Finally, she decided honesty was the only path worth taking. "Alexander, who are you, truly? You have never told me your family name, and the staff here treat you with a strange kind of respect that seems far too formal for a simple visitor." For a moment, Alexander said nothing, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent. Elena watched the muscles in his jaw tighten, as though he were fighting some internal battle she could not see. "It is complicated," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "There are things about my life that I have not shared with you, not because I wish to deceive you, but because I have valued, more than I can express, the simplicity of what we have built here. The moment I tell you the truth, everything changes. I would rather know the truth and face whatever changes come with it," Elena said firmly, than continue wondering in silence. Alexander turned to face her fully then, his expression unusually vulnerable. "Elena, I promise you, the truth will come very soon. There is an event at the estate, only a few days from now, where everything will become clear. I ask only that you trust me until then. Can you do that?" She studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception and finding none, only a quiet, pleading sincerity that touched something deep inside her chest. "I trust you," she said finally, though a small knot of worry remained lodged beneath her ribs. "Thank you," he said softly, reaching out to take her hand in his, a gesture that felt both new and strangely familiar. "Whatever happens after that day, please remember that everything I have shared with you here, every conversation, every afternoon spent beneath these trees, has been real. None of it has been a performance." His words settled into her heart like seeds planted deep in fertile soil, and though the uncertainty of what was coming still lingered at the edges of her thoughts, Elena found herself believing him completely. The days leading up to the mysterious event passed in a strange blur of anticipation and dread. The entire estate seemed to buzz with activity, as workers hurried back and forth preparing the grounds for what the staff whispered was the annual Harvest Festival, a grand celebration held each year to honor the completion of the season's work. Elena had attended smaller versions of this festival before, simple gatherings with music and food shared among the estate workers, but this year the preparations felt different, larger and more elaborate than anything she had witnessed in the past. Long tables were set up beneath strings of lanterns in the estate's central courtyard. Musicians arrived from the nearby town, tuning their instruments in preparation for an evening of dancing. The kitchen staff worked tirelessly, filling the air with the rich smells of roasted meats and fresh bread. And throughout it all, Elena caught glimpses of unfamiliar carriages arriving at the estate gates, carrying finely dressed guests she had never seen before, their laughter and conversation carrying across the grounds like foreign music. "This festival seems grander than usual," she remarked to her father one evening, as they watched another elegant carriage roll through the gates. Edmund nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "There are rumors that important guests have been invited this year, something about a formal announcement the family wishes to make." Elena's stomach tightened at his words, though she could not have explained exactly why. "What kind of announcement?" "I could not say for certain," Edmund replied, though the housekeeper mentioned something about a betrothal being discussed among the upper household. "It is not our place to concern ourselves with such matters, of course, but the whole staff has been talking of little else." A betrothal. The word settled uncomfortably in Elena's mind, though she pushed it aside, telling herself it had nothing to do with her, nothing to do with Alexander, nothing to do with the promise he had made her only days before. On the night of the festival itself, Elena dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue gown that had once belonged to her mother, carefully altered to fit her over the years. Charlotte helped braid flowers into her hair, humming happily as she worked, clearly excited for an evening of music and celebration. "You look beautiful," Charlotte said, admiring her work in the small mirror that hung on their bedroom wall. "Perhaps your mysterious stranger will finally reveal himself tonight." Elena managed a small smile, though nervousness fluttered restlessly in her chest. "Perhaps," she said quietly, unable to shake the strange sense of foreboding that had settled over her since her father's mention of the betrothal. The courtyard, when they arrived, had been transformed into something magical. Lanterns glowed warmly against the darkening sky, their light reflecting off polished silver and crystal glasses arranged along the long tables. Musicians played a lively tune as guests mingled and danced, their laughter mixing with the sweet scent of orange blossoms carried on the evening breeze. Elena had never seen the estate look so beautiful, so full of life and celebration. She searched the crowd for Alexander, her heart quickening with anticipation, but the sea of unfamiliar faces made it difficult to spot him among the crowd. She wandered closer to the main pavilion, where the estate's family typically gathered to greet their guests, hoping to catch sight of him there. And then, as the music paused and a hush fell over the courtyard, a formal announcement began, and Elena's entire world tilted sideways for the second time since she had first stumbled into Alexander's arms beneath the orange trees. An older man in formal attire stepped forward onto the raised platform at the edge of the courtyard, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. "Distinguished guests, tonight we gather not only to celebrate another successful harvest, but to honor a member of this household, whose leadership has guided this estate through years of prosperity." Elena watched with growing confusion as the crowd's attention shifted toward the pavilion entrance. A moment later, Alexander emerged, dressed not in the simple, unassuming clothes she had grown accustomed to seeing him in, but in a formal coat of deep blue, embroidered with silver thread along the collar and cuffs. A thin circlet of gold rested against his dark hair, and the crowd around Elena immediately fell into respectful bows and curtsies. "Presenting His Grace, Alexander Ashbourne, Grand Duke of Ashbourne Hall," the announcer's voice rang out clearly, and the words struck Elena like a physical blow. Grand Duke. The man who had knelt beside her in the dirt, pulling weeds and gathering bruised oranges, who had spoken to her as though she were his equal, who had held her hand and promised her the truth was coming, was not a merchant or a visiting official at all. He was the ruler of the entire estate, a man whose family name commanded the respect of everyone gathered in that courtyard. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet, though she remained perfectly still. Around her, the guests applauded warmly, their faces bright with admiration as Alexander stepped further onto the platform, offering a brief, practiced smile to the crowd. He looked entirely different in this setting, composed and regal, every inch the powerful figure his title suggested. For a moment, Elena wondered if the man she had come to know beneath the orange trees had been nothing more than a performance after all, a temporary mask worn for reasons she could not begin to understand. She should have felt joy, perhaps, or at least relief that the mystery surrounding him had finally been solved. Instead, she felt only a hollow, aching betrayal, sharp and sudden, as though something precious had been stolen from her without warning. He had let her believe they were equals. He had let her share her deepest thoughts and dreams with him, unaware that the entire time, an impossible gap of status and power stood between them, one that made every quiet afternoon they had shared feel suddenly foolish and naive. Her eyes searched the crowd desperately, and then she found him, still standing on the platform, his gaze already fixed on her from across the courtyard. Something flickered in his expression the moment their eyes met, a mixture of guilt and longing that made her chest ache even through her anger. She wanted to turn away, to disappear into the crowd before he could approach her, but her feet remained rooted to the spot, caught between the urge to flee and the desperate need to understand. Before she could decide which impulse to follow, the announcer continued speaking, his voice carrying a new weight of formality that made Elena's stomach clench with dread. "Tonight, we are also honored to celebrate the strengthening of ties between two great families. It is with great pleasure that we announce the betrothal discussions between His Grace, Alexander Ashbourne, and Lady Cordelia Whitmore, daughter of the esteemed Whitmore family." A ripple of polite applause moved through the crowd as a striking young woman stepped onto the platform beside Alexander, dressed in an elegant gown of deep crimson, her dark hair pinned elaborately atop her head. Lady Cordelia smiled graciously at the assembled guests, slipping her arm through Alexander's with practiced ease, as though the gesture had been rehearsed 100 times before. Elena felt something inside her chest crack open, though she forced her expression to remain neutral. unwilling to let the surrounding crowd see the devastation she felt. Betrothal discussions. The words echoed in her mind, cold and final, erasing every warm memory of the past few weeks in a single, cruel stroke. She did not wait to hear anything further. Turning quickly, she pushed her way through the crowd of unfamiliar faces, ignoring Charlotte's confused calls behind her, and made her way out of the courtyard, into the quiet darkness beyond. She did not stop walking until she reached the orchard, the same rows of orange trees where everything between them had begun, and there, finally, she allowed the tears to fall freely. She did not know how long she stood there, surrounded by the familiar scent of citrus and damp earth, before she heard footsteps approaching along the path behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. "Elena?" Alexander's voice called softly, hesitant in a way she had never heard from him before. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" she said, refusing to face him, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "That you allowed me to believe we were equals, while all along you were a Grand Duke, already promised to another woman? What is there possibly left to explain?" "The betrothal is not finalized," Alexander said quickly, moving closer, though he stopped several paces away, respecting the distance she had placed between them. "It was arranged by my late father years ago, long before I had any say in the matter. I have never wanted this match, Elena. I have spent months trying to find a way to avoid it entirely." "And yet you stood beside her tonight," Elena said, finally turning to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You let the entire estate believe the arrangement was already settled. Because I did not yet know how to refuse it without destroying alliances that matter to more people than just myself," Alexander said, his voice strained with frustration, and something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. "Elena, please understand, none of what happened between us in this orchard was ever a lie. Every word, every moment we shared, was real. I simply did not know how to tell you the truth without losing you the very moment you learned it." "You should have trusted me with the truth from the beginning," Elena said quietly, wiping angrily at the tears that continued to fall despite her efforts to stop them. "Instead, you let me fall for a man I thought I understood, only to discover I knew nothing about him at all." Alexander took a careful step closer, his expression pained. "You know me better than almost anyone else in my life, Elena. Better than my own mother, who sees me only as a title to be married off for political gain. Better than the guests inside that courtyard, who smile at me while calculating what they might gain from my favor. You are the only person who has ever spoken to me as though I were simply a man, not a duke, not an heir, not a political prize to be won." His words struck something deep within her, softening the sharp edges of her anger, though the hurt remained lodged firmly beneath her ribs. "That may be true," she said finally, "but it does not change the fact that you deceived me, even if your intentions were never cruel, and it does not change the fact that you are promised to another woman, regardless of how unwillingly." "I have not signed anything," Alexander said firmly. "I have not agreed to anything. Elena, I need time to find a way through this that does not require me to abandon everything I have come to feel for you." Elena studied his face for a long moment, torn between the desire to believe him and the painful awareness of just how impossible their situation truly was. A Grand Duke and a groundskeeper's daughter. The gap between their worlds felt suddenly vast and unbridgeable, no matter how deeply their conversations beneath the orange trees had once made it feel otherwise. "I do not know if there is a way through this at all," she said quietly. "Perhaps it would be easier for both of us if we simply accepted the truth of who we are, and let this end here, before it causes either of us further pain." "I refuse to accept that," Alexander said, his voice suddenly fierce with determination. "Elena, please, give me a chance to prove that what we have built together is worth fighting for. I am not asking you to trust me blindly. I am asking you to give me the opportunity to earn that trust back, honestly and openly this time." Elena wanted, more than anything, to simply walk away, to protect her heart from further hurt by closing the door on whatever fragile connection had grown between them. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew she could not fully commit to it. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and confusion churning inside her, some stubborn part of her heart still believed in the man who had knelt beside her in the dirt, who had listened to her dreams with genuine interest, who had held her hand and promised her honesty, even if that promise had come too late. "I need time," she said finally, stepping back from him, "time to think, and time away from all of this, at least for now." Alexander nodded slowly, though the disappointment in his eyes was impossible to miss. "I understand," he said quietly. "Take whatever time you need, Elena. I will be here, waiting, for as long as it takes." She left him standing alone among the orange trees, the distant sound of music and celebration still drifting faintly from the courtyard behind her, and made her way home through the darkness, her heart heavier than it had ever been before, caught between anger, heartbreak, and a hope she was not yet ready to fully abandon. The days that followed the festival passed slowly and painfully. Elena threw herself into her work, rising before dawn each morning to tend the orchard, using the physical labor to distract herself from the storm of emotions still churning inside her. She avoided the paths where she and Alexander had once walked together, choosing instead to work in the furthest rows of trees, far from where he might find her. Word of the betrothal announcement spread quickly throughout the estate, carried from servant to servant in hushed, excited whispers. Elena heard fragments of gossip wherever she went, speculation about the upcoming wedding, admiration for Lady Cordelia's elegance and grace, quiet murmurs about the political advantages the match would bring to both families. Each overheard conversation felt like a fresh wound, though Elena forced herself to remain composed, refusing to let anyone see how deeply the news affected her. Charlotte, sensing her sister's distress, tried gently to draw her out, but Elena found herself unable to speak of what had happened, the wound still too raw and confusing to put into words. Instead, she buried herself in silence, finding what little comfort she could in the steady, familiar rhythm of orchard work, letting the days blur together in a haze of exhaustion and heartache. It was nearly a week later, as Elena knelt beside a young orange tree checking for signs of disease along its lower branches, that she first noticed something was wrong. A strange, unfamiliar man in formal estate livery approached her from the direction of the main house, his expression grim and businesslike. "Elena Whitfield?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes," Elena said, rising slowly to her feet, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. "Can I help you?" "I am afraid I bring troubling news," the man said, his voice carefully neutral. "There have been reports of missing valuables from the main house, items belonging to Lady Cordelia Whitmore. Given your recent connection to His Grace, questions have been raised regarding your family's involvement." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "That is absurd," she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "My family has never taken anything that did not belong to us. We have served this estate faithfully for generations." "I am simply relaying the concerns that have been brought to the household's attention," the man said, though his expression softened slightly, as though he too found the accusation difficult to believe. "I am afraid, however, that until the matter is properly investigated, your family's continued residence on the estate grounds has been called into question." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, and for a moment she could not find her voice at all, the ground beneath her feet feeling suddenly unstable, as though the entire foundation of her life was being pulled away without warning. Elena ran home immediately, her mind racing through every possible explanation for what she had just been told. By the time she reached the small cottage, she found her father already standing outside, speaking with two more members of the household staff, his face pale with confusion and worry. Charlotte stood beside him, her arms wrapped protectively around their younger brother, tears already welling in her eyes. "Papa, what is happening?" Elena asked, hurrying toward them. Edmund turned to her, his expression grim. "They are accusing our family of theft, Elena. They say a valuable necklace belonging to Lady Cordelia has gone missing, and that it was last seen near the cottage grounds. They are threatening to remove us from the estate entirely if the matter is not resolved." "That is impossible," Elena said firmly. "None of us have taken anything. This has to be some kind of mistake." "Or it is no mistake at all," Charlotte said quietly, her voice trembling with barely suppressed anger. "Elena, think about it. This accusation appeared only days after the betrothal announcement, only days after everyone at the estate began whispering about your connection to the Grand Duke. Does that truly seem like a coincidence to you?" Elena's stomach twisted with a horrible realization. Lady Cordelia. It made a terrible kind of sense, the timing far too precise to be accidental. If someone wanted to remove a perceived rival from the estate entirely, orchestrating a false accusation against her family would accomplish exactly that, all while appearing to be nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding. "We need to speak with Alexander," Elena said, though the thought of seeking him out again, after everything that had happened between them, filled her with a complicated mixture of reluctance and desperate hope. "Elena," Edmund said gently, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder, "I do not think it wise to involve the Grand Duke directly in this matter. It could complicate things further, especially given the circumstances of your recent friendship with him." "Papa, if this accusation truly stems from Lady Cordelia's jealousy, then Alexander is the only person with enough authority to clear our family's name," Elena said firmly. "I have to try, regardless of how difficult it may be." Without waiting for further argument, Elena set off toward the main house, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She had avoided Alexander for nearly a week, unwilling to face the tangled emotions his presence stirred within her. But now her family's home and reputation hung in the balance, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She found him in the estate's private study, hunched over a stack of papers, his expression tired and distracted. He looked up the moment she entered, surprise flickering across his features, before being quickly replaced by something warmer, something that looked almost like relief. "Elena," he said, rising immediately from his desk, "I did not expect to see you." "I would not have come if the circumstances were not urgent," Elena said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "My family has been accused of theft, Alexander. They are threatening to remove us from the estate entirely." Alexander's expression darkened immediately. "Theft? What has gone missing?" "A necklace belonging to Lady Cordelia," Elena said. "They claim it was last seen near our cottage, though none of us have ever laid eyes on it, let alone taken it." For a long moment, Alexander said nothing, his jaw tightening with an anger Elena had never seen from him before. "This is unacceptable," he said finally, his voice low and controlled, though the fury beneath it was unmistakable. "I will get to the bottom of this immediately, Elena. I promise you, your family will not suffer for an accusation they had no part in." "You believe me then?" Elena asked quietly, searching his face for any trace of doubt. "Completely," Alexander said without hesitation. "I know your family, Elena. I have seen the honesty and integrity with which you approach every aspect of your life. There is no possibility in my mind that this accusation holds any truth." Relief flooded through her, though it was quickly tempered by the enormity of what still lay ahead. "Thank you," she said softly. "I did not know where else to turn." "You were right to come to me," Alexander said firmly. "Whatever has happened here, I intend to uncover the truth, and I will ensure that whoever is responsible for this false accusation faces the appropriate consequences." Over the following 2 days, Alexander launched a quiet but thorough investigation into the missing necklace, questioning household staff discreetly and reviewing the movements of everyone who had access to Lady Cordelia's private chambers on the night in question. Elena waited anxiously at home, the uncertainty of her family's future weighing heavily on her despite Alexander's reassurances. It was on the 3rd day that the truth finally emerged. A young housemaid, trembling with nervousness, came forward to Alexander privately, confessing that she had witnessed Lady Cordelia herself hiding the necklace within a drawer in the cottage, during a brief visit under the pretense of delivering formal notices to Elena's family. The housemaid had said nothing at the time, fearful of the consequences of accusing a noblewoman of wrongdoing, but her conscience had finally overcome her fear. Armed with this information, Alexander called a formal gathering of the household staff and estate officials, determined to clear Elena's family name publicly and unequivocally. Elena stood beside her father in the main hall as Alexander addressed the assembled crowd, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "It has come to my attention," Alexander announced, "that the recent accusation of theft made against the Whitfield family was entirely false, orchestrated deliberately to remove them from this estate under dishonest pretenses. I have obtained a witness testimony confirming that the missing item was planted within their cottage by another party, and I intend to ensure that the true perpetrator of this scheme faces appropriate consequences." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd as all eyes turned toward Lady Cordelia, who stood near the edge of the gathering, her face pale with the sudden realization that her scheme had been uncovered. She opened her mouth as though to protest, but the housemaid's testimony, combined with Alexander's unwavering certainty, left little room for denial. "Lady Cordelia," Alexander continued, his voice cold and formal, "I believe it is time we discuss the future of our betrothal arrangement in private." The crowd dispersed quickly after that, whispers of scandal already spreading through the estate like wildfire. Elena felt a complicated mixture of vindication and unease as she watched Alexander lead Lady Cordelia away toward his private study, uncertain of what conversation might follow between them, but grateful, at least, that her family's name had been cleared so publicly and decisively. Her father embraced her tightly once the hall had emptied. "Thank you, Elena," he said quietly. "Whatever complicated feelings surround your connection to the Grand Duke, there is no denying his loyalty to our family in this moment. He did not have to defend us so publicly," Elena said, still processing everything that had happened. "He could have resolved the matter quietly, without risking scandal for himself." "Perhaps," Edmund said, studying his daughter's face carefully. "He felt that clearing your family's name honestly was more important than protecting his own reputation. That is not a small thing, Elena, especially for a man in his position." Elena said nothing, though her father's words settled deep within her, softening the last remnants of doubt she had carried since the night of the festival. Whatever fear or hesitation had kept her from fully trusting Alexander before now felt increasingly difficult to justify, especially in the face of everything he had risked to protect her family. Later that evening, as the estate settled into quiet darkness, Elena found herself once again walking toward the orchard, drawn by an instinct she did not fully understand. She was not entirely surprised to find Alexander already there, standing beneath the same tree where they had first argued after the festival, his expression heavy with exhaustion but also, unmistakably, with relief. "I ended the betrothal," he said quietly, before she could speak. "Formally and permanently. My mother is furious, and there will undoubtedly be political consequences to face in the coming weeks. But I could no longer continue pretending to accept an arrangement built on nothing but obligation and deceit." Elena's heart pounded fiercely in her chest. "Alexander, are you certain? The political alliance, your family's expectations, all of it?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Alexander said, closing the distance between them. "Elena, these past days watching you fight so fiercely for your family, watching the honesty and courage with which you approach every difficulty, only confirmed what I already knew in my heart. I do not want an arrangement built on convenience and political gain. I want a life built on truth, and trust, and genuine affection, the kind of life I have only ever glimpsed with you." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, though this time they were tears of a different kind entirely, warm and hopeful rather than heavy with heartbreak. "I was so afraid," she admitted softly. "Afraid that the gap between our worlds was simply too vast to overcome." "Perhaps it is vast," Alexander said gently, reaching up to brush a stray tear from her cheek. "But I have never believed that distance alone should determine what is possible between two people who genuinely care for one another. Elena, I am not asking you to become someone you are not, or to abandon the life and the family you love so deeply. I am simply asking for the chance to build something new together, honestly and openly this time, without secrets standing between us." Elena studied his face for a long moment, searching for any trace of the uncertainty that had haunted her since the festival, and finding none, only a steady, unwavering sincerity that finally allowed the last of her doubts to fall away completely. "Then let us build it," she said softly. "Together, honestly, and without secrets." Alexander's answering smile was brighter and more unguarded than any she had seen from him before, and as he gently took her hand once more beneath the sheltering branches of the orange trees, Elena felt, for the first time since the festival, that perhaps their story was not one of impossible distance after all, but simply one that had needed a little more honesty to finally find its way toward something real. News of the broken betrothal spread through the estate and beyond within days, carried by the same tireless network of whispers that had once fueled rumors of theft and scandal. Elena braced herself for judgment, certain that many among the nobility would view her connection to Alexander as scandalous. A groundskeeper's daughter, daring to capture the attention of a Grand Duke, meant for someone of far higher standing. She was not entirely wrong. Letters arrived at the estate from concerned relatives and political allies, questioning Alexander's judgment, warning of consequences that might follow such an unconventional choice. Alexander's mother, the Dowager Duchess Margaret, proved to be his fiercest critic. She summoned Elena to the estate's formal receiving room only days after the broken betrothal became public knowledge, her expression cold and calculating as Elena entered, doing her best to steady her nerves despite the intimidating grandeur of the surroundings. "Miss Whitfield," the Duchess said, her voice carrying the practiced chill of someone accustomed to commanding respect through tone alone. "I assume you understand the gravity of what you have done." "I have done nothing, Your Grace, beyond forming an honest connection with your son," Elena replied carefully, refusing to let her voice waver despite the intensity of the older woman's scrutiny. "An honest connection," the Duchess repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Tell me, Miss Whitfield, what do you know of running an estate of this size? Of managing political alliances that stretch across the entire region? Of raising children who will one day be expected to carry the weight of this family's legacy?" Elena felt a flicker of doubt at the Duchess's pointed questions, but she pushed it aside, drawing instead on the same quiet strength that had carried her through every difficult moment of her life thus far. "I know nothing of those things yet, Your Grace," she admitted honestly. "But I am not afraid to learn. I have spent my entire life adapting to difficult circumstances, caring for my family, managing responsibilities far beyond what most people my age are asked to carry. I believe that capacity for growth and dedication matters more than the circumstances of my birth." The Duchess studied her for a long, tense moment, something unreadable shifting behind her sharp eyes. "You are not what I expected," she said finally, her tone slightly less hostile than before. "Most young women in your position would have simply agreed with everything I said, desperate to please me. I did not come here to please you, Your Grace, Elena said honestly. I came here because Alexander asked me to, and because I believe that honesty, even when it is difficult, matters more than empty flattery. Something almost like respect flickered across the Duchess's face, though she quickly masked it behind her usual composed expression. We shall see, Miss Whitfield, whether your convictions hold as strong when the true difficulties of this life begin to test them. The conversation, though far from warm, marked a small shift in the ongoing tension surrounding Elena's relationship with Alexander. It was not acceptance, not yet, but it was, perhaps, the beginning of a grudging curiosity that Elena chose to view as a small victory, rather than an outright defeat. In the weeks that followed, Elena found herself navigating an entirely new world, one filled with formal etiquette lessons, political discussions she barely understood, and the constant, watchful scrutiny of nobility who whispered behind painted fans whenever she entered a room. It was exhausting, and there were nights when she returned to her family's cottage feeling utterly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had chosen to pursue. Alexander remained a steady presence throughout it all, never allowing her to face the challenges entirely alone. He accompanied her to formal gatherings when his schedule permitted, offering quiet guidance whenever she stumbled over unfamiliar customs, and defending her fiercely whenever cruel whispers reached his ears. Slowly, gradually, the estate's initial skepticism began to soften, replaced by a grudging admiration for the quiet strength and genuine kindness Elena brought to every interaction, regardless of how unfamiliar the circumstances. Charlotte, ever perceptive, noticed the transformation taking place within her sister. You seem different lately, she observed one evening, as they sat together in the cottage's small kitchen, shelling peas for the evening meal. Stronger, somehow, even though everything happening around you seems so overwhelming. I suppose I am learning that strength does not always mean avoiding difficulty, Elena said thoughtfully. Sometimes it means facing it directly, even when you are uncertain of the outcome. And Alexander? Charlotte asked, a teasing smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Are you certain about him, at least? Elena felt a warm smile spread across her own face, unbidden and entirely genuine. About him, Charlotte, I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. Nearly a year passed following the broken betrothal, a year filled with challenges and small victories, moments of doubt balanced carefully against growing confidence and trust. Elena learned the intricate customs of noble society, not by abandoning who she was, but by finding ways to blend her own honest, grounded nature with the formal expectations of her new world. She continued spending time in the orchard whenever her schedule allowed, refusing to let her growing responsibilities separate her entirely from the simple joys that had first brought her and Alexander together. The Dowager Duchess, though never entirely warm, gradually came to respect Elena's quiet determination, occasionally offering guidance that, while delivered with characteristic bluntness, revealed a genuine, if reluctant, fondness developing beneath her formal exterior. Even the estate staff, who had once regarded Elena with curious uncertainty, came to view her as a natural and welcome presence within the household, her genuine warmth and humility earning loyalty that mere status could never have commanded. As the following year's harvest season approached, preparations began once again for the estate's annual festival, though this time, Elena found herself involved directly in planning the celebration, her insights into the practical needs of the orchard workers proving invaluable in ensuring the festival honored not just the nobility's enjoyment, but the genuine hard work of everyone who contributed to the estate's prosperity. On the evening of the festival, as the courtyard once again filled with lanterns and music, Elena found herself standing beneath the same grand orange tree where Alexander had first revealed the truth of his identity, and where, months later, he had ended his arranged betrothal in favor of honesty and genuine affection. The tree stood heavy with ripe fruit, its branches slightly bowed under the weight of another successful harvest, the sweet scent of citrus mixing pleasantly with the evening breeze. It seems fitting, does it not? Alexander's voice said softly from behind her, that we find ourselves here again, exactly 1 year after everything between us truly began. Elena turned to face him, her heart swelling with the same warm affection that had grown steadily stronger with each passing month. It does feel fitting, she agreed, smiling as he took her hand gently in his. Elena, Alexander said, his voice suddenly serious, though warmth radiated clearly beneath the solemnity of his tone. This past year has taught me more about honesty, courage, and genuine partnership than I ever expected to learn. You have shown me, again and again, that true strength lies not in status or wealth, but in integrity and quiet determination. I cannot imagine building the rest of my life with anyone other than you. Elena's breath caught as Alexander slowly lowered himself onto one knee before her, producing a small velvet box from within his coat pocket, his hands steady despite the emotion clearly visible in his eyes. "Elena Whitfield," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet orchard, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not as a Grand Duke offering a political arrangement, but simply as the man who once knelt beside you in the dirt, gathering bruised oranges, hoping desperately that you might one day feel for him even a fraction of what he had already begun to feel for you." Tears of pure joy welled in Elena's eyes as she looked down at him, her heart overflowing with a happiness she had never dared to fully imagine possible when she had first tumbled unexpectedly into his arms beneath these very trees. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Alexander, I will marry you." Alexander rose immediately, sweeping her into his arms as the distant sounds of music and celebration continued to drift from the courtyard behind them. As their engagement was formally announced later that evening, the crowd erupted into genuine, warm applause, a stark and welcome contrast to the tense, uncertain reception that had greeted their connection nearly a year before. Standing together beneath the orange trees, surrounded by the sweet scent of ripening fruit and the warm glow of lantern light, Elena reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. A simple accident, a fall from a ladder, had led her into the arms of a man whose title and status had once seemed impossibly distant from her own humble life. Yet through honesty, courage, and a willingness to fight for what truly mattered, they had built something far more valuable than either status or wealth could ever provide, a partnership grounded in genuine trust and unwavering affection. As the harvest festival continued late into the night, filled with laughter, music, and joyful celebration, Elena knew with complete certainty that whatever challenges still awaited them in the years ahead, she and Alexander would face them together, hand in hand, beneath the same orange trees that had first brought them together, and beneath which everything in her life had truly changed.